So my name is Mahesh, and I work in Accenture, and I work in the area of quality engineering and testing. And I got interested in this topic, and not being a researcher, not being a PhD, I thought the next best thing would be to throw this idea at scholars like all of you, and then see what comes out of it. And so the next 10-15 minutes, I'll be talking about what's the influence of language and symbols, semantics and semiotics. How does it affect the emotions of software engineers? So we all know that narratives rule the world. It is really not about the facts and the actual details, but how those facts are presented in an external casing of narratives. And we all know this intuitively, that in the media or wherever it is, in politics and media, even in corporates, it is the narratives that really create impact on the minds of the listeners. And this has been always known, that the narratives really create a big impact rather than how the actual details and the facts. Now, how it is used in media, it's used in politics, but let's see what is the research that tells us how it really impacts emotions and thinking, right? So this is a call for research on how language and symbols affect thinking and emotion, and subsequently the behavior and output specifically for software engineers. It is true for all human beings. We all know intuitively, but how does it, what are the possible impact for software engineers? So there is always this debate about whether software development is art or a craft or a science. If it were a pure science, and there is absolutely only facts, and you know exactly how to code, then the emotion doesn't come into it. But if it is accepted that software engineering, how you write a code, is a lot about art, because different people write code very differently. It's an art. You can call it a science, you can call it engineering. It's also an art. So artists like all of you, are definitely impacted by emotions, impacted by what is thrown at you, the words, the symbols. So let's examine this. So what do we mean by language? If you're speaking English, does it mean that we're going to study various languages? I'm just trying to adapt it. Even if it is English or French or Italian or Korean or Japanese, certain vocabulary and jargons that are used in software engineering in that particular language, they possibly are the subject of research. Not just the language, different languages. It is the vocabulary, the jargons, the symbols, phraseology, the patterns of repeated phrases in the context of project plans, in the context of peer-to-peer interactions, context of manager-team interactions, artifacts, names of metrics, how they are termed, performance management, and stakeholder team interactions. So this is what I thought we can adapt the language, from language to more of within the language, what phrases, what vocabulary, what terms we could use, and how does it affect. Let's look at prior research. I bring 5 different prior existing research. Many of you would have heard it, being in the realm of emotions. One is Sapir-Whorf hypothesis of linguistic determinism and relativity. And there are 2 versions of this, that language determines thought and cognition. Language only influences. So here you could take vocabulary, terminology determines thought and cognition, and vocabulary, terminology, and symbols influence. You could take any of it depending on what side you are. But then this has sparked a lot of enthusiasm as well as controversy. So the best, very good paper that you could look at it is Paul Kay and Willett, written in 1984. Some examples is there is a language called Imithir in Australia. I think it is a very old language spoken by the original inhabitants of Australia, wherein when you ask someone a direction, they don't necessarily tell you straight and right and left. They talk in terms of actual direction, north, south. So the thinking of those people is that wherever they are, wherever they are, they exactly know what direction they are facing. So you cannot have a conversation with them unless you have a sense of direction. So the whole language has determined their behavior, that they know exactly which side of the, what direction they are facing and what direction they are going. And some of these, I come from India, so a couple of interesting words called Prakriti in Sanskrit is primarily nature. And frequently, human body is referred to as belonging to Prakriti, which is nature. The whole thinking is that human beings are part of nature and not necessarily adversarial, but part of nature and should be aligning with nature. Or the Sarira is basically another term for the human body, and that means that which decays. So which often takes people who speak Sanskrit, that when they think about the body, they not necessarily think about body as physical entity, that is something that decays. So it's a call for action to go beyond the body into the spiritual realms. This is definitely not a lecture on philosophy, but I just wanted to bring out certain examples of how a term can trigger certain thinking and emotion in you and make you behave very differently. So in the realm of software, how can terminologies shape thinking and cognition of software engineers? What terminologies are we using? We'll come to the research questions in a few minutes. So this is the first prior research that I wanted to show it to you. Second is the linkage between language and emotion. Very good work done by Kristen and Jennifer on the conceptual act theory that language plays a role in emotion. So what kind of emotions contribute to a higher productivity and effectiveness of a software engineer, right? And then we will talk about the Robert Blumchick wheel also later on. Third research is primarily how a study on how language influences future-oriented behavior. Very interesting work done by Keith Chen. Primarily, he did work on how the language influences economic behavior, but it can very well be applied to software engineering. I will outline this. For example, it's called the future time reference, which studies both when and how languages require speakers to mark timing of events. Certain languages grammatically equate the past and the future, which means that when people plan, they act certain things in the present, they always are future oriented. Probably they will save a lot more than other cultures, but this is again a hypothesis. We'll have to read this paper and more in detail. So primarily this is about what terminologies can encourage future-oriented behavior of software engineers, like maintainability, environment friendliness, scalability, and future-proof design. Often we find that in software engineering, under the pressure of time, often the future-proof aspect of the software is sacrificed. So could there be new terminologies we could define and design short terms and symbols that would encourage intuitively the software engineers to think in terms of maintainability, environment friendliness, scalability, and future-proof design. The fourth research that I would like to bring about is the concept of hypocognition. Again, work done by David Dunning. Is in cognitive linguistics, hypocognition means missing and being unable to communicate cognitive and linguistic representations because there are no words. For example, if in a language there are no words to describe certain color, then most likely the speakers may not understand what the color means. For example, again, the George Orwell's very interesting set of essays, the fictitious language called Newspeak. The Newspeak language is in that set of essays is primarily a language designed by an authoritarian state, language designed for news channels to discourage dissent and disagreement. So the citizens of that country cannot dissent and they cannot disagree because the language does not permit them. So the whole thinking is all about agreeing with whatever the news channels talk about. So what problem patterns do we have in software engineering that are due to non-existent and or ambiguous terms that defy adequate solutions or adequate descriptions and interactions? So can we think deeply about, what are the problems today and why those problems occur? For example, in the realm of testing, we always look at symptoms, and if the symptoms don't exist, there are no bugs. There is no thinking about asymptomatic failures in system testing. Language as symbolic action, fifth prior research done by Kenneth. All language is inherently persuasive because symbolic acts do something as well as say something. So what is the connection between terminologies and symbols and trigger the emotions and action in the context of day-to-day life of a software engineer? For example, user empathy, teamwork, society consciousness. Are there certain terms that we could start to use that would positively impact the symbolic action of software engineers? So five prior research that could be drawn upon as just a summary here. So Sapir-Whorf hypothesis to trigger thinking and cognition of software engineers, linkage between language and emotion to bring about higher productivity and effectiveness, language influencing future-oriented behavior to trigger future-orientedness of software engineers, or hypocognition to identify certain lack of terms that are causing certain problem patterns to occur over and over again. The fifth is language as symbolic action that could trigger certain emotions and action in the context of day-to-day life of software engineer. So to summarize, the call for research for all the scholars and definitely willing to look at industry, academia collaboration here is, what is the stimulus here? Language and symbols, inferred cognition leading to certain emotion trigger in the software engineer's brain and mind, leading to favorable or unfavorable outputs of code or design document or whatever that is. So here I have broken the research questions into five categories based on the various dimensions of a typical software engineering project management, process, and then measures and metrics. For example, what kind of emotions like passion, excitement, fear, panic, or boredom would typical project vision meetings evoke? In project reviews, what kind of emotions did the language and symbol evoke? Shared sense of progress or excitement or fear? Did it invoke excitement, or did it invoke a lot of fear about, say, deadlines or whatever? In the process documentation, did it invoke a sense of confidence that when I know I am more joyful, or did it invoke boredom or sense of wasteful effort or despair due to a lot of process bulky overheads? Or did the meeting language and terminology, did it evoke a sense of responsibility, team camaraderie, or warmth and sense of envy and jealousy? And of course, the measures and metrics are very important. What kind of emotions could those metric names, like productivity, for example, or timeliness, or whatever that is? Did it invoke a sense of shame or a sense of pride or a nervousness or panic? And these emotions could be, we can draw inspiration from Plutchik's wheel of emotions that all of you probably know. This is a summary. It's a call for research of a very important topic that we all go through every day. We listen to news and then it triggers certain thinking, certain emotions in us. So why don't we use this in a positive way in the world of software engineering? That's the end of the presentation. Any questions, suggestions, would be very glad to take.